Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. Today is the 13th of September, 2022. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com, and I got a good hour of streaming for you today. In this video, we're going to touch on several topics. A big one, of course, being the passing of Queen Elizabeth, which I did do a video on earlier this week. That video is linked down below in the description. Today we're going to talk about several tributes to the Queen that seem to have occurred over the past week in the world of sports. That includes Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and a big UFC event over the weekend, where even Joe Rogan put out an Instagram post noticing a bizarre numeric synchronicity. And we'll talk about this synchronicity and expand more on it and why these numbers are so significant to the new King of England, Charles III, who was, of course, named after his father, Prince Philip, who we will talk about in this video as well. To open up the NFL season this year, on Thursday, the same day that the Queen died, the Buffalo Bills, with Josh Allen, defeated the defending champion LA Rams. We'll talk about why this game ended with a 31-10 finish. And then in New York, remember my video on the Queen talked a lot about 9/11 and how the date 9/11 was significant to the Queen, dying just 3 days before the 11th. Well, when you say 9/11 in America, most people think of New York City, and just a day after the Queen died, Yankee Aaron Hicks had a horrible day in the field, actually getting pulled mid-game due to his woes. And we'll talk about how this is a riddle connected to Aaron Boone, the coach, and Aaron Judge, another man on the Yankees. A lot of Aarons here. Also, Aaron Rodgers of the Packers, whose middle name is Charles, just like the new king. On that same day, C.J. Cron of the Colorado Rockies hit the longest home run in Major League Baseball history, at least in the StatCast era. So we'll talk about how those numbers line up as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about some organic numerology. This past week over at Marquette University, Zachary K. Hubbard was in town, so I dropped in to stand by all the people who were at the campus with signs and talk to some of the students about Gematria. And I want to talk about the alarming numeric synchronicity that popped up in that as well. And speaking of Jesuit campuses, the Catholic Church, former Pope John Paul I was beatified last week by Pope Francis, just a couple days before the Queen died. And I want to talk about how this is a riddle connected to the Beatles, a man getting beatified with the same name as the two frontmen of the Beatles. And the day that he was beatified was just 3 days after the debut of a new television series called The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Now, The Lord of the Rings was, of course, directed by Peter Jackson, and that's the same man who directed the Beatles documentary from last November. Finally, for any pro wrestling fans in the chat, I'm going to talk about this AEW brawl. And just like Peter Jackson, this brawl in AEW involved the Jackson brothers, Matt and Nick Jackson, otherwise known as the Young Bucks. I'm sorry, the Young Bucks. And that fight was very much by the numbers. And we'll talk about whether it was staged, whether it was real as it's being reported, and the like. For starters, I want to talk about the UFC fight. UFC 279 held this past weekend. And a really popular fighter, Nate Diaz, who has been with the promotion for over 15 years, fought what could be his last fight against opponent Tony Ferguson. And this was a very significant date for Diaz, who has an alarming number of synchronicities with the king, the new king. In the standard alphabetic order, where each letter is assigned a number relative to its position in the alphabet, this cipher is called ordinal, simply numbers the alphabet 1 through 26. Nate Diaz's full name sums to 148. Notice how he was born on April 16th of 1985, the same year that this presenter was born in. Well, if you measure from that date to the fight, you'll see that Nate Diaz was exactly a span of 148 days after his birthday. So it was a big day for him to be in the spotlight. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Joe Rogan even put out this post on Instagram where he zooms in on the number 209. And I guess it's coincidental that there just happens to be 290,999 likes when I took this photo. But anyway, why is 209 so significant here? You see Joe Rogan, he's like, wow, I'm starting to think we live in a simulation. Holy shit. Now, I wish Joe Rogan would have someone like me on his show who can talk about numeric synchronicities and really truly wake people up to what's happening. Of course, I'm not exactly holding out hope that that'll happen. But why is he so fascinated by the number 209 here? Well, Nate Diaz was born in Stockton, California. And Nate is the brother of Nick Diaz, who's, of course, also from Stockton. And Stockton, California is home to the 209 area code. Tony Ferguson tapping out at exactly 209 left in the round here in this fight. What Joe Rogan does not divulge, however, is that 209 is a significant number to the UFC. Using ancient Latin, or what used to be called Jewish Gematria on the original Gematrinator calculator, UFC has a value of 209. I consider this cipher to be the most significant out of the base four. But of course, Joe doesn't tell us that. Now, the number 209 is significant for a number of reasons here. The city of Stockton, California, where Nate and Nick Diaz are from, was named after a man called Robert F. Stockton. Notice how in the reverse alphabetic order, the name Robert F. Stockton has matching gematria with 209. On top of this, notice how the name Nate Diaz has the same value as 209, different ciphers but large numbers. This 738 is also shared by the new king, Charles. On top of all this, his opponent was even 209 days after his birthday, the day before this fight. The number 29 also connecting to the date. The 29th prime number is 109. The 10th of September when they fought can be written 10/9. But here's where everything gets undeniable. This past weekend's event was UFC 279. An important detail about Nate Diaz is how he got his big break into the UFC. That happened by winning a show called The Ultimate Fighter 5, Season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter. Well, in the language of Gematria, notice how The Ultimate Fighter has a value of 279 in the reverse order. In fact, when Nate Diaz won The Ultimate Fighter, he had just turned 794 weeks old, which is just one number off of 793 in Latin. But back to this 279, in homage to UFC 279. There's another significant set of ciphers that I teach. And on the current version of the website, these are called Frank Baconis, Francis Bacon. On the new version, I'm going to simplify the names here. And what you're looking at is just capital letters mixed into the language, or added on. And again, all based on the simple alphabetic order. Well, notice how that with capitals added, the name Robert F. Stockton, which Stockton, California is named after, also has this value of 279. This brings us to King Charles. His full name at birth was Charles Philip Arthur George. And look how his name in the standard alphabetic order sums to 279. In fact, if you measure from the date of the last total solar eclipse to the death of the Queen, notice how you get a span of exactly 279 days. Now, in my video on the Queen, I talked about at length how it was connected to various eclipses, and we'll dive more into that in a little bit. But there's even more connecting to 279. When you write this number out, notice how you get a value of 284. This happens to be the value of the Ultimate Fighter 5 in Gematria, which also sums to 284. But notice how both Diaz brothers, Nathan Donald Diaz and Nicholas Robert Diaz, Both have reverse gematria of 284. On top of all this, the number 279 has matching gematria with Ultimate Fighting Championship. So a lot of 279 syncs, all connected to King Charles, which again is the gematria of his full name. Furthermore, his full name also matches UFC 279, 135 and 396. This 396 value, which we see here, also the value of Charles and 5 in the Sumerian methods. The Sumerian methods also based on the alphabetic order, simply multiplying this method by 6, a cipher connected to how we measure time. In the alphabetic order, when you write out the Ultimate Fighter, notice how we get 207. Well, when Nate Diaz won the Ultimate Fighter, it was the year 2007. And in Latin gematria, this is the name of the new king, Charles, 207. In fact, in that Latin method, notice how Nate Diaz equals 660? That's just like the word king. King is 66. In fact, Charles is 66 in ordinal. If we add capital letters once again, notice how the name Nate equals 66. So does the name Diaz, 66. The number 5 equals 66. It was Season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter that Diaz won. What about Robert F. Stockton, who seems to be connected? Well, Robert F. Stockton equals 66. And would you believe what year he died in? That's right, 66. When you write out the number 66, look at these values, 41 and 67. Well, the word king equals 41 and 67. Even when you add the capital letters, look at this, king, 67. And finally, the full name, Nathan Donald Diaz, in reduction, sums to 67. As far as the date of the fight, this happened on a date with numerology of 41. 9 plus 10 plus 22. That's the ordinal value of king. So people wonder, why these fighters wait so long between bouts and have these retirement matches when they're well past their prime. Granted, he won the fight. But again, all a tribute to the new king. And this wasn't limited to the UFC. This type of tribute occurred in the NFL just as well. So let's dig into this a little bit. So this Thursday, on the date of the Queen's death, happened to be the very same day that the new NFL season started. And we had our first game between the Bills and Rams. Now, as soon as the Queen passed away, England took up an operation called Operation London Bridge, which is a series of events and ceremonies that occur after the death of the Queen. And this is also called London Bridge is Down, right? As an homage to the old nursery rhyme, The London Bridge is Falling Down. Well, let's check this out. In Gematria, London Bridge has this value of 311. And consider how this was the operation that was underway just as this game was being played. And here we have a final of 31-10. Speaking of eclipses in connection to the death of Queen Elizabeth, the city of Buffalo is the last major city that the 2024 total solar eclipse will pass over in the United States. Queen Elizabeth's birth name was Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, which sums to 2024. Her name also equals 99, and this 2024 eclipse occurs on the 99th day of a leap year, April 8th. And Buffalo, the final city that it goes over. Later on, we're going to talk about this big fight that occurred in AEW. And it's worth mentioning here because the next episode of Dynamite took place in Buffalo, New York. And in fact, the main event of that event saw a guy from Buffalo win a championship. So Buffalo got a big tribute in that event. So the first day of the NFL season, the Queen dies, and Buffalo plays, getting a big win over the defending champions by a score of 31-10, connecting to London Bridge. Now, if you look up the history of the London Bridge, there's actually several sources that say the London Bridge was burned down in the year 1013. That's interesting because that's the same digits that appear in this score, 10 and 31. Next up, we're going to look at this story about Aaron Hicks and look at Aaron Hicks's full name gematria in this same trigonal method. His name equals 1013, just like the year that the London Bridge was brought down. Notice how the city of Buffalo has matching gematria with Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, 126 in reverse, Buffalo, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, 126 in reverse. So let's talk a little bit about the quarterback here for the Buffalo Bills, who was praised afterwards for having a great game, Josh Allen. Now, for starters, Josh Allen was a quarterback drafted out of Wyoming University. Notice how Wyoming has an ordinal value of 106. Well, 106 is also the ordinal value of Elizabeth II, the deceased queen's queen name. In reduction, Elizabeth II equals 61. This game that Josh Allen played on the start of the season was his 61st career start in the NFL. Now think about the first name Joshua. This is essentially the English version of Jesus. Queen Elizabeth died on the date September 8th, which is traditionally recognized as the birthday of the Virgin Mary, September 8th. And as we just pointed out, the Queen's real name, her last name is Mary. In fact, Elizabeth Mary sums to 64, just like Virgin Mary. There's another significant cipher based on math called prime numbers. And again, still the alphabetic order, A through Z, but here we use the associated prime numbers. And in this method, Queen Elizabeth II sums to 521. Josh Allen was born on 5/21, May 21st. Notice how he was born in the year 96. Well, the Queen passed away at age 96. 96 years old when she died. And when you write out the name Josh Allen, it sums to 96 in the alphabetic order. Notice how the Queen's birthday, if you multiply the digits in her date of birth, you actually get a product of 96. Josh Allen plays in Buffalo, New York, which equals 69, the inverse. But check this out. On the date of the game, Josh Allen was 9,606 days old. So you could say that he just turned 9,600 days old, which connects to all of this. But another reason I find this 966 so interesting is that when you turn it upside down, you actually get the number 996. The new King of England, when you write out his full birth name, sums to 996. Another significant thing about all of this is that Josh Allen is currently 26 years old. When you write out the word queen, it sums to 26. And in this game, Josh Allen completed a total of 26 passes. Queen Elizabeth II was born in the year 26. Her reign began on February 6th, or 2/6, and she was coronated on the 2nd of June, or 2/6 in England, just after she turned 26. a little bit more about this Jesus riddle, which is very clear here. So a lot of people believe that Jesus' real birthday actually falls on the date September 11th, which makes a lot of sense in light of world events and what the occult believes. So the Virgin Mary, born on September 8th, the same date that the Queen died. Notice how September 8th falls under the sign of Virgo. And it's believed that Jesus, born on September 11th, also a Virgo. Now, Virgo is ruled by the planet Mercury. And notice how the Queen was born on April 21st, making her a Taurus, which is actually ruled by Venus. My bad. I explained this in my last video. We'll get to this in a second. But we talked a lot about September 11th. Notice how those attacks in 2001 fell on a date with 41 numerology. And we're talking about the planet Mercury being the ruler of Virgo. Mercury summing to 41. Mercury also the god of transportation and communication, also trickery. And think about 9/11, right? We had modes of transportation, airplanes, slamming into a building with giant antennae on top of them for communication. And the whole thing was obviously a conspiracy, which speaks to trickery. This was also Josh Allen's 41st career victory. And in this game, there were a total of 41 points scored. Worth pointing out, by the way, that Josh Allen was born on a date with primary numerology of 141, 521 of 96. The number 141 is significant to his team. Notice how Bills equals 141. And then Buffalo, New York, when abbreviated, equals 141 as well. His birthday is usually also the 141st day of the year. All right, I'll get to AEW in a minute here, but what I want to talk about first is this related story from New York. So this time it's the day after the Queen died, and this all happened on September 9th, the date written globally as 9/9. Notice how the name Elizabeth Alexandra Mary sums to 99, and Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip, died last year at the age of 99, and he died on the 99th day of the year. Recall how this second eclipse occurs on the 99th day of a leap year. This first eclipse over the United States was the first coast-to-coast eclipse in 99 years, since 1918. So how is this connected to the Queen? Well, I knew something was up here because here we have a player named Aaron Hicks. And he's a teammate of who will probably be the MVP this year, a man named Aaron Judge. And the coach of the Yankees is even named Aaron Boone. And this is all a day or two before the start of the NFL season. The NFL's MVP was Aaron Rodgers. But consider how this connects to baseball, because Aaron Rodgers plays in Wisconsin. And Hank Aaron, the all-time home run king, played in Wisconsin with both the Braves and Brewers. And, of course, he was the home run king, Hank Aaron. And now all of this going on the same week that we get a new king. You may remember that the home run king died just a day after the radio king, Larry King. I mean, I don't know who's scripting this, but they're doing a good job. Now, if you measure from the death of the home run king, Hank Aaron, to the date that Aaron Hicks had this horrible game in New York, notice how the date falls exactly 85 weeks later. Let's pull up Aaron Hicks' page here. Notice how the name Hicks sums to 85 in Gematria, using the reverse order. Hicks is currently 32 years old, and this game was 23 days or 3 weeks and 2 days before his birthday. The name Hicks in Gematria equals 32 and 23. As I pointed out earlier, his full name equals 1013, just like the year that the London Bridge was allegedly burned down, these same digits in the score of the football game. And when we're talking about kings and queens, we're of course talking about royalty. And the Yankees are the royalty of baseball, having won a total of 27 World Series championships. So, once again, this all happened on September 9th, or 9/9. Using the standard alphabetic order, the name Aaron Hicks equals 99. Hicks was replaced in the outfield by a man named Florial. And notice how the last name Florial sums to 99 using capital letters. A reason this number is so important to the Yankees right now is because the word judgment equals 99. And the Yankees have another major player named Aaron Judge, who wears number 99. Also notice how judgment equals 144 in the reverse alphabetic order. Aaron Judge's full name sums to 144 in the alphabetic order. And when you write out 99, is it? No, it's 44. Yeah, 44 equals 99 and 144. And I only mention that because 44 and 99 are very similar in how they look. But on top of all this, the number 99 equals 57. And not only does Aaron Judge have this 57 gematria, but the new king, Charles III, also equals 57. This game that I'm talking about finished with a score of 4-2. The name Aaron Judge equals 42. Now, when you write out Aaron Judge in ordinal, notice how we get this 96. Well, that's the same as Josh Allen, who we just covered. 96, just like the age at which the Queen died. Measuring from Aaron Judge's last birthday to the date of this game, notice how it was a span of 137 days. The number 137 is the 33rd prime number. Judge plays for New York, which equals 33. Meanwhile, Aaron Hicks, look how old he was. He was 3 weeks and 3 days before his 33rd birthday. If you measure between the birthdays of Aaron Hicks and Aaron Judge, they were born 30 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days apart. Notice how the Queen's full name has gematria of 303. And if you measure from the date that Aaron Hicks was traded to the Yankees, November 11th, to the date of this game, that's a span of 303 days. The man who replaced Aaron Hicks in the outfield after getting benched, he wore number 90, and the number 90 sums to 33 in reduction. Now, one more thing connecting these guys, Aaron Hicks and Aaron Judge. You may be thinking, oh, there's a lot of teammates with the same first name. This is no big deal. You're making something out of nothing. But what about this? Earlier this season, on July 6th, Hicks hit his first career grand slam. And in that game, Aaron Judge also hit a grand slam. So that was the first time in the history of Major League Baseball where two players with the same first name hit a grand slam. So the fact that they have the same first name is significant, and this highlights that. Notice how the phrase grand slams has matching gematria with both Aaron Hicks and Aaron James Judge. So when they hit those grand slams, I know this is complicated, but this will all make sense. When they hit their grand slams, Aaron Judge was 30 years and 71 days old, okay? Well, those are the same 3 digits when you measure from Aaron Judge's debut to the date that Aaron Hicks was benched on the 9th. 317 weeks. Well, the number 317 is the 66th prime number. And remember 66 and how it connects to King, Charles. The game was even 66 days after they both hit a grand slam in the same game. Their manager, Aaron John Boone, has that 66 value. We talked a lot about 33. Well, 33 equals 66. It also equals 60. And this game fell on a date with 60 numerology. There's even more here connected to the number 666. When you write out the number 33, it sums to 66 and 60. And in Sumerian Gematria, when you write out New York, it equals 666. Well, Aaron Hicks was born on the 275th day of the year. And when you write out the number 666 as it's spelled, it equals 275. If you write out 666, you get a 294, which is, intriguingly enough, the same as 603 score and 6 with an ampersand. And measuring from the birthday of Hank Aaron to the birthday of Aaron Hicks, it's exactly 2,904 weeks. All right, so that decode got a little busy towards the end, but there's another big story from that same exact day that makes this numerology completely undeniable. Also on September 9th, a player from the Rockies named CJ Cron hit the longest home run in the StatCast era in Major League Baseball. And I want you to look at the time that they even published this article, 9:09 Eastern. This must be the time that's displayed everywhere because I'm in the Central Time Zone. And it still shows me Eastern. This 9:09, here we go again with the 99. This all happened on the date 9/9, September 9th. And let's quickly watch this home run. Look at the pitcher who threw the ball. Wait a minute. Did I see that correctly? Oops. Is he wearing number 99, this pitcher? My goodness, he is. Now, they reported that this home run went 504 feet, and 5 plus 4 is 9, okay? All happening on September 9th. So let's pull up CJ Cron, and I want you to see something funny. This name Cron equals 50 and 23, and this was the same day as the Aaron Hicks story. Notice how Hicks equals 50 and 23. Well, the 99th prime number is 523, right? Both these men's names summing to 50 and 23. And then look at this. You write out the name CJ Cron, and it sums to 99. His home run came off of a pitcher, Kanon Middleton, who wears number 99. Now, when you write out the number 99, notice you get this value of 129. Using the S exception, CJ Cron's full name sums to 129. The pitcher he hit this off of, check out his gematria, 166 and 996. You have an upside-down 99 and a couple of 99s there. CJ Cron was even born in 1990, which has the 99 right in the middle of it. He was also 119 days before his birthday. And, of course, 99 is 11 times 9. But check this out. Look at the score of this game. The Arizona Diamondbacks lost to the Rockies by a score of 10-13. Once again, Operation London Bridge was in effect. Following the passing of the Queen, London Bridge equals 311, and the London Bridge was said to have been burned down in 1013. So, yet another 1013 riddle connected to the operation. CJ Cron was born on the 5th of January, the date written 1/5. This connects him to Aaron Michael Hicks, whose woes occurred on the same day. And notice how his name equals 150, like 1-5. If you take CJ Cron's full name, notice how you get a value of 264. Well, that's a lot like Aaron Judge's birthday, the 26th of April, 264. Also notice the 303. Judgment equals 303. That was a big number in the New York Yankees story. 303 days after the anniversary of the trade. The two men were born 30 months, 3 weeks, 3 days apart. I also noticed this 244. Christopher John Cron Jr. summing to 244. That's important because King Charles III equals 244. Now, I talked about Thursday Night Football with the Bills, but I did not mention Sunday Night Football with Tom Brady. Tom Brady got the win on a featured game, Sunday Night Football, this week. And notice how that was his 244th career win. 244, a big number for King Charles III. CJ Cron's home run gave the Rockies an 8-1 lead over the Arizona Diamondbacks. Arizona Diamondbacks equals 81. And I kind of wish they said the home run was 505 feet instead of 504, because 505 is the value of Colorado Rockies. All right. So a little bit of the organic side today. Now, once again, this past, Wednesday, I got a call from Zach in the morning, and he told me he's on his way to Milwaukee, and he said it would be cool if I showed up at Marquette and maybe held some signs with him, talked about Gematria with some folks passing by. Now, it's no secret. Zach and I haven't always seen eye to eye, and there's been some things said on some of our channels, a little bit derogatory, not very flattering. However, through all that, I've always said that, Zach and I still have the same goal, which is to spread the knowledge of Gematria, which is both enriching, enlightening, and empowering. So, Zach called, and he was pleasant, and I was pleasant, like I've always been. And I said, sure, I'll show up. Why not? Not only because, I thought it would be cool to do this little thing on the street, but also because in the back of my mind, I knew there would be a ton of synchronicity with this meeting. I mean, of course it would be, right? The two men whose combined powers have brought Gematria to more people than anyone finally meet. So of course this is going to be by the numbers. And this organic stuff is a little bit about has something to do with the division of our work, right? Now, Zach focuses on exposing organizations like the Jesuit Order, which is what we were here doing. Now, on my channel, I'd try to spend just as much time on things that I believe to be organic. And ultimately, I try to reserve judgment when it comes to a lot of things because we simply don't know. When it comes to fake news, I absolutely believe that things that are simply published or dates on which people are hired, those are certainly done intentionally by the numbers. Often, I think. But when it comes to people dying, sports games, things like that, I have my doubts as to how much humans are really aware of. So, other than that, I don't have much more to say on it. And Zach and I exchanged pleasantries, even a little hug at the end there. We both recognize that our work benefits each other, and we're both doing good to help spread this work. So, I'm not interested in beefs. That's not why I started a YouTube channel. I started it because I had a lot of cool information to share, and I'm going to keep sharing that. So that's really all there is to it. No sense reading into it anymore, but I did anyway, right? September 7th is when this all happened. And when I got back home, I was like, okay, so 9/7 at Marquette, it all going down. So I did a little research into Marquette. And, as a word of wisdom to Zach, he actually did this when he went down to Louisiana, where I think this was after LSU won the national championship. He went down to LSU and talked about Gematria with a lot of the people there. And the reason that went so well is because he had done a significant amount of work to show people that how that was coded. And I think if we're going to visit universities and stuff like this in the future, I think it would be worth it to spend time decoding the university so that the students can come up and see that the very college they're attending has this riddle involved as well. So I started to look and say, well, let me do some decoding on Marquette, seeing as I just went there that day. Well, if you look up Marquette, you find that it was founded by a man named John Henney. And the very first thing I noticed about John Henney is that he died on September 7th, the same day that Zach and I met up at Marquette University. Notice how the name John Henney has Gematria of 97 and 250. And he died on the date 9/7, which is the 250th day of the year. Now, if you measure from the death of John Henney to the date that Zach and I met up at Marquette University, it was exactly 141 years. So what a date for Zach to meet the Gematrinator. Using the alphabetic order, Gematrinator equals 141. And if you watch this live stream, which is linked in my blog post here, 141 is actually the very first number I mention when I come up. I talk about how Comedy Central aired their little Gematria calculator segment. They uploaded it to Twitter on 8/11. And 8/11 is the 141st prime number. So while I was saying that, subconsciously, maybe my brain was figuring this all out. I don't know. But how funny that's the first number I said. This meeting also occurred 95 days after my birthday. And when you write out my full name, it sums to 95. And I even have 95 birth numerology, as we see here. And speaking of 95, Marquette is a Jesuit university, and the Jesuits were founded on September 27th, which is the date that leaves 95 days in the year. So let's talk a little bit more about Marquette University. Actually, before I do, I just want to mention, the Queen died the next day. So when I was looking for something big to happen synchronistically with this meeting, there's not many bigger political or world figures than the Queen to pass away. And on top of all that, September 8th, when the Queen died, is actually Zach's mom's birthday. And on that date, his mom turned 70 years old. And Queen Elizabeth was the queen for 70 years. She just had her Platinum Jubilee back in February. And while I'm on this topic, I actually want to show you guys this. This is really weird. So if Zach's mom turned 70, that means she was born in 1952. And I noticed that when you measure to my mom's birthday, it's 318 days. So my mom was born 318 days after Zach's mom. And this kind of blows my mind because when you look at Zach's birthday and then measure to my birthday, our birthdays are separated by 318 days. That's weird. So this means both of us were born 316 days after our mom's birthday. Just bizarre stuff. I mean, I've done decodes on this on the past, but just to drive it home, my name equals 83, which is the year he was born in. And then I think it's Zachary K. Hubbard, which equals 85, the year I was born in. And Lord knows there's a lot more. Yeah, Zachary Keith Hubbard equals 89, like the 8th of September, the Queen's death. So, of course, he was going to be synced up to it, right? Anyway, Marquette University, where we met, what I wanted to mention here is that this university was founded in the year 81. And August 28th is funny because that's my business partner's birthday. But anyway, 1881, right? So the year 81. When you write out Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it equals 81. And the man who founded the university, notice how his gematria surrounds the number 81. On its own, the city of Milwaukee sums to 37. And the school was named after a French explorer named Jacques Marquette. And notice how Jacques Marquette was born in the year 37, and then he would go on to die at the age of 37. In fact, the name Jacques Marquette sums to 61, and Jacques Marquette was born on June 1st, or 6/1. Yes, he died. Okay, we'll talk about this in a second. Now, Jacques Marquette died on the date 5/18, which is written, or I'm sorry, May 18th, which is written 5/18. The founder of Marquette University, his full name sums to 5/18 using prime numbers. And look what year he was born in, 1805. Very similar to the date 18th of May when Jacques Marquette died. Jacques Marquette died on a date with 114 numerology, 5/18 of 1675. Curiously enough, that's the same birth numerology that I have, 114. Another connection for me here. Marquette University sums to 114 in reverse reduction. And Jacques Marquette died 1 year and 14 days before his 39th birthday. And 39 is the reduction value of Marquette. So yeah, all I'm saying is that I wish I looked at this before I went and had some information on Jacques Marquette and John Henney, right? And then we would have been out there on the anniversary of Henney's death, which would have been, perfect. And how strange is it that he died just 10 days after the university was founded, right? Seems like a pretty quick demise after all that work. All right, so this all happened at a Jesuit university. The same week that we had the death of the Queen, which was a major riddle connected to the current Pope, Pope Francis. And if you want more information on that, check out my video on the death of the Queen, where I explain how it's connected to her COVID diagnosis, her vaccination in January of last year, and also the date that COVID was declared a pandemic. Even Event 201, which was the pandemic exercise that preceded the real pandemic, it was all related. The Queen died just 4 days after the beatification of Pope John Paul I. And I guess John Henney, John Paul, there's another connection. But I'm going to pull up some pages here connected to these guys. Pope John Paul I, who was only the Pope for 33 days. Notice how he died September 28th, which was 1 day after the Jesuit order anniversary, which was September 27th. Now, last year, January of 2021, I made this post talking about how the death of Pope John Paul I was connected to John and Paul of the Beatles, right? Well, later that year, in November of 2021, we got a huge new documentary called Get Back, which is this 8-hour miniseries following the Beatles through their final concert. Now we get the beatification of this Pope, John Paul I, and this is going to be connected to the Beatles. And if you think that's ridiculous, it is, but hey, this is the world we live in. Now, once again, Get Back was directed by Peter Jackson. And Peter Jackson's most popular project, Lord of the Rings, just got its own TV show 3 days before this beatification. John Paul I was beatified on September 4th, which is exactly 44 weeks after Peter Jackson's birthday. Notice how the name Jackson equals 44, so does Beatles 44. Measuring from the beatification to what would have been Pope John Paul I's next birthday, which is October 17th, is a span of 44 days. Back in 1978, this man died on a date with numerology of 44. Notice how the word kill equals 44. And he became the Pope in 1978, which is 44 years before 2022. Measuring from the release of the Beatles' Get Back documentary to to the beatification of Pope John Paul I, it was 283 days. Why is that significant? Well, the word beatified has a value of 61, and this number, 283, that's the 61st prime number. Notice how both Peter Jackson and John Paul I have matching gematria of 137. This is the 33rd prime number, and measuring from the date that he began his papacy to the date of his death was exactly 33 days. This pope's real name was Luciani. Notice how Luciani sums to 33 in reduction. And he was beatified 330 days after John Lennon's birthday. My post that talks about the death of Lennon, the death of Pope John Paul I, explains how these are numerically connected. And just to explain how wild this synchronicity is that Lennon and McCartney met in the year 1957. And the very next year, we had the first pope named John since the 14th century. And the next pope after John was the first pope named Paul since the 17th century. And that was in 1963, just when the Beatles started to get big. And then Pope Paul dies, and the next pope is the first pope to ever have a double name, Pope John Paul. So I have my theories on exactly what of this is synchronicity and what is, man-made murder, but maybe I'll talk about that at a different time. Anyway, this number 33 is so significant to his death. Not only was he the pope for 33 days, but consider the element on the periodic table that is most closely associated with poison, arsenic, which is the 33rd element on the table. Arsenic sums to both 33 and 330 in Fibonacci. But there's another big part of this that connects everything. When you write out the number 33, you get this Latin value of 895. This is the same value as ritual human sacrifice, 895. And I truly believe this is a huge reason why we see the number 33 in death so often. Notice how ritual human sacrifice equals 911 in satanic gematria. The Pope was beatified 9 months and 11 days after Get Back came out. Notice how, in reduction, ritual human sacrifice equals 94. Pope John Paul I was beatified on September 4th, the date written 9-4. When he died in 1978, it was the date leaving 94 days in the year. Now, the date of his beatification can also be written 4/9, as it would be in England, where the Beatles are from. And look at the gematria of Get Back, the new Beatles documentary. 49 and 22, just like the date of the beatification, the 4th of September in the year 22. The word Catholicism equals 49, just like the date. But also notice how Catholicism equals 323. Measuring from Pope John Paul I's birthday to the date of the beatification was a span of 323 days. This man was the 263rd pope in the history of the Catholic Church. The number 263 is the 56th prime number. And notice how the word pope sums to 56 in reverse. So does the word beatified, 56. The Beatles equals 56. In fact, the Beatles Get Back, also 56. Notice how Pope also equals 175. Pope Francis also equals 175. And measuring from the date that Francis became the Pope to the date of this ceremony was 175 days. The Pope, speaking of his papacy, our current Pope is the 266th Pope. think about the associated prime numbers with these digits. The second prime is 3, and the sixth prime is 13. Well, this man became the Pope on 3-13-13, the second, sixth, and sixth primes. The number 313, which is like the date he became the Pope, is the 65th prime number. And notice how the Beatles Get Back equals both 65 and 313. Well, look how old John Paul I was when he became the Pope. 65 years and 313 days. So, undeniable connections here. Numeric rituals playing out. Here's an example of something that is certainly man-made. Selecting the date of a ceremony to sync up with all of this stuff. Pretty obvious. So we have this sync here with Peter Jackson from this past week. Well, also this past week, we had an event called AEW All Out. And for those of you not familiar with the pro wrestling industry like I am, AEW is WWE's main competition here in the United States. And they're a fairly big wrestling organization, certainly the biggest since WCW back in the 90s. And after their pay-per-view event, All Out, this past week, there was a huge backstage brawl. And it happened between CM Punk, the company's leading guy, and the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson. And this fight was reported to be completely real. This wasn't staged. This wasn't part of the show. Nobody saw it happen. And I know what you're thinking, right? This is pro wrestling. It's all staged. It's all scripted. There's no way you believe this is real. But if you actually follow this sport like I do, everything does add up here. I actually do believe that these guys had a fight backstage. It just makes too much sense because, number one, this does not help the company at all. It kind of makes everything look silly and foolish, you know? And, there's a lot of anger in the wrestling industry right now because AEW is not like traditional wrestling. They do a lot of stuff that kind of makes wrestling look a little goofier. And there's a lot of people who think wrestling should be a serious business. CM Punk being one of those people. He has a much different philosophy than, let's say, the Young Bucks, right? And I mean, part of the reason I'm doing this decode in this video is because, we had this meetup between me and Zach at Marquette this week. And to me, I always lean towards getting along with people, especially when we have the same goal. And here's an example of what happens when you don't work with each other. When you don't, you end up fighting, you end up messing things up, you end up making everyone look stupid. So here we have CM Punk and the Young Bucks going at it. Now, here's what's so wild about this, is that, first of all, CM Punk's real name is Philip. And of course, we had the death of Prince Philip last year. And now it's Charles Philip Arthur George is the king. Well, notice how the name Philip Brooks, as he spells it, Philip Brooks, sums to 162. This is CM Punk's real name. 162 in the alphabetic order. Well, look how old he was on the date of this fight. 16,020 days old, matching his Gematria. Those are also the same digits in his birthday, October 26th, 1026. So that's pretty wild, right? Well, the story of this fight is that CM Punk punched Matt Jackson. And then there was a melee involving other people, but this was a true detail, right? He definitely punched Matt Jackson. Well, Matt Jackson's real name is Matthew Massey. See this? Matthew Massey. And I want you to see his Latin Gematria of 1369. Well, look how old Matthew Massey was on the date of the fight. 13,690 days old, the exact same digits. Also notice how Massey was born on March 13th, 313, which is the same day that Francis became the Pope in history. And measuring from CM Punk's birthday to the date of the fight was 313 days. So hey, could this have been all staged? Sure, I suppose it could have. I don't know. All I'm saying is that, as this was a perfect example of, this 141 sync with Gematrinator, numerology can manifest organically. So when I claim that some of the stuff that Zach decodes is actually organic, or maybe, I'm also exonerating him by saying that, because people could come in and say, oh, see Zach doing things by the numbers, he's a Jesuit, he's in on it too. No, guys, it's not that simple. You got to use your head, you got to look at people, you got to read people, their motivations, and what's going on. But, again, I'm just giving you the numbers, y'all can make your own judgments. CM Punk was also 52 days before his birthday. Notice how AEW and AEW All Out both equals 52. This fight overshadowed the return of MJF, who was feuding with Punk, and came out and addressed Punk at the end of the show. His name is 52. Punk will be 44 years old next month. Notice how Punk equals 44 in standard Gematria. And he got in a fight with Matt and Nick Jackson. Jackson equals 44. And again, their real name is Massey, but their ring name is Jackson, just like Peter Jackson. CM Punk, intriguingly, has matching Gematria with Beatles. I don't really see the big connection there, but John Lennon was killed on the 343rd day of the year, so we do have some alignments. There's also some interesting stuff with 1331 that I wanted to share in the post. I'm not going to go over it here. But yeah, this wasn't like overwhelmingly by the numbers, but we do have these two syncs, right? Directly with their names and ages. So, interesting stuff. Were we all worked with this? I guess it's possible. The wrestling industry isn't what it used to be. When they work the fans, they have to be a little more creative in how they do it. So, there you have it. Before I sign off here, we've been going a little over an hour, so thanks to everybody who stuck around for the whole video. It's been fun. Just to real quick talk about the royal family and this eclipse code, which I expanded on a lot in my video on Queen Elizabeth. There were actually a couple connections that I totally missed that I wanted to quickly go over. We start with Queen Elizabeth. Again, her husband was Prince Philip. Now, Prince Philip was born on June 10th of 1921. This means that on what would have been his 100th birthday, this eclipse occurred over the crown of the globe, right? We have this eclipse that began in Canada and was so far north on the planet that it actually began moving east to west, whereas most eclipses move west to east. This one went the opposite direction. In St. Louis, there's a major monument called the Gateway Arch. And notice how this arch is very similar to the path of this eclipse. The Gateway Arch was inaugurated on June 10th, the same day as Philip's birthday, the same date as this arch eclipse. Now, if you measure from the date that this arch opened to the public to the date of this eclipse, notice how it was exactly 54 years. The word sun equals 54. So does the word arches, 54. Later on in 2021, there was another arch eclipse, but it was at the South Pole, and the path looked just like this one. Sun arches equals 54. So does arch eclipse, 54. And again, this happening at the crown of the globe, all connected to a change of the crown. The Gateway Arch was even opened in the year 67. And total solar eclipse equals 57. This eclipse was not a total eclipse. It was an annular one, but the one at the South Pole was total. St. Louis, Missouri sums to 67 also in the year 67. Now, if you measure from the date of that eclipse to the death of the Queen, notice how it was 1 year and 90 days. And so much of that video was centered around the number 19. Queen equals 19. And if you measure from her death to the date of the 2024 eclipse, which passes over the United States, you find she died exactly 19 months before that eclipse. And 190, like solar eclipse, 190, right? We just talked about total solar eclipse, 67, which is the 19th prime number. Another big part of that video was her full name, summing to 225. And the reason this stood out is because she died 225 days before her birthday. Her death also fell 225 days after the date 126, January 26th. Well, she had gotten the COVID vaccine, and the COVID vaccine was first approved by the FDA on the same exact date as this total solar eclipse over Argentina, which is home to Pope Francis. This eclipse here was the exact midway point of the two great American eclipses. Well, look what happens when you measure from that, I call it the vaccine eclipse, to the date of the Queen's death. It was 20 months and 25 days, 225, just like her name, dying 225 days before her birthday. Back in March, I did a decode on the death of Madeleine Albright. And Madeleine Albright was the first female Secretary of State. And this woman, Téa Leoni, was the star of a show called Madam Secretary. And Madeleine Albright's death earlier this year was completely linked to the Queen. I actually have a video on that on my channel. And notice how Téa Leoni, who played Madam Secretary, her real name is Elizabeth. And in the show, Madam Secretary, she even plays a character named Elizabeth. And check this out. Téa Leoni was born on February 25th, the date written 225. So a lot of connections to this number for the Queen, but I wanted to point out how it connects to this Jesuit vaccine eclipse, the date on which these megalomaniacs tried to inject everybody with a poison, and did actually successfully inject many people with that poison. Now, I don't know whether everybody got poisoned, but certainly a lot of people did. But hey, what I just said is complete misinformation. I'm actually a comedian now. I didn't tell you that until just now, but yeah, a couple minutes ago I turned into a comic. So everything I say is a joke. It's all in jest. I'm hilarious. I'm crazy. All right, guys. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.